I'm Catherine Caruana-McManus from Mesheds, and we are an Internet of Things integrator. The organisation was founded about 5 years ago, but what we're doing today, we've been doing very solidly for 4 years now. The company was formed for a single purpose, and that was to provide affordable but secure LoRaWAN IoT data networks focused on the city's infrastructure and environmental sectors. And there was an opportunity in the market to provide a different model as opposed to the model of IoT delivered by the major telcos. And we have had a very strong partnership with the Things Network and the Things Industries. And we now have over 80 managed network services customers, and many of those are cities. And so we've been helping them with their low cost data acquisition and data insight needs. And the other vision is to be very collaborative. So we've done that in a way where we've really embraced an open ecosystem, and that has been instrumental in our success because we've been able to onboard some amazing solutions by some of the world's most reputable providers. And as an integrator, we're also integrating into some of the world's largest AI ML networks. So that's been a very important role for us. Prior to being a co-founder of Mesheds, I started off my career in government in the city space. And then I spent many years with one of the largest telcos here in Australia. And then nearly 10 years with IBM. And I was involved in the launch and the growth of the IBM Smarter Cities movement. And then I left IBM and helped KPMG set up their IoT practice. But the call for setting up my own startup in partnership with another amazing individual, Andrew Maggio, and also Paul McManus was too strong. And so I'm here now 4.5 years in, and things are going very well.
Great, thanks for that. And I think you've got such an interesting background because like you were part of the very first kind of conferences on smart cities, you know, really there at the beginning. I don't know, maybe you even coined the phrase, but just this kind of literally the mesh of technology in cities. So I think it's a really nice kind of place to be.
I suppose I would frame it with connecting the physical world with the digital world, and the physical infrastructure with digital infrastructure. And that is really what it's about. And it's also focusing on communities. And that's something that we've been really cognizant of not having an approach which is alien to cities being able to look at what their community needs and therefore how they can embrace the Internet of Things.
Yeah, and I think because that was going to be my question. I was kind of how would you describe the Internet of Things? But I think you might have just done it. And would you want to add anything to that?
Look, for me, it's really simple. It's about getting information about the things that matter to the customer so that they can provide a better service to the community, the citizen, or the industry they serve. And, you know, for someone who's been involved, I was involved in the mid-1990s in launching very large internet businesses to the market. And what I've seen is this, I'm an internet baby, I've seen the evolution of the internet. We saw the early days of the internet as this really very collaborative, kind of open, it came out of the research sector where there was this genuine, vision to connect peers and to do, to build on that so that, we could do things better. And I think the Internet of Things has the potential to do that. But, I think one of the challenges is that as a technology person in an industry which is driven by technology, often we get too caught up in the actual device as opposed to the purpose of that device. So my definition of the Internet of Things is the Internet of data. It's breaking down the silos so that you can actually make sense of what's happening out there in the environment, and then turning that into purposeful insights so that, things are better for industries and people who interact with that.
Very well said, thank you. And then I think I wanted to ask you about the ecosystem. So you talked right at the very beginning about being this integrator and how important that role is in the ecosystem. And I feel that you're kind of a really nice kind of place in the ecosystem where, on one hand, you use the IoT ecosystem to help build the right services, but you're also so close to the end users, and even the smart cities themselves are not necessarily the users of IoT, or like they've got their own customers, I suppose, their own citizens and their own workers. How would you describe the ecosystem from your perspective and some of the challenges it's facing today?
That's a really great question. So there's the ecosystem of those parties providing the essential capabilities so that it works for the customer. So that's devices, networks, applications, and then that's feeding into, obviously, data insights. So there's that whole sort of, I would call that the kind of the enablers, the technology ecosystem. But in the world of smart cities and infrastructure, there is the ecosystem around decision makers, policy leaders, and the constituents. And so what you find is that the ecosystem approach absolutely forces you to collaborate, for the very reason that I also was involved, and I'm a founding member of the Internet of Things Alliance for Australia, which we started, getting on to 5 years ago now. And the reason why we formed the Internet of Things Alliance for Australia was because, as a nation, Australia was nowhere in the conversation about the value that the Internet of Things could bring to our industries, and for us to look also globally as to how we could connect with the great benefits that Germany and the US and the UK and parts of Europe and Singapore and others were seeing in this space of Industry 4.0. So, I think that coins it quite well, that you have to, from an industry perspective, bring people together. And that is not easy because on the technology side, the government sector and the technology sector are often really not speaking the same language. So we find ourselves enmeshed, being very cognizant of the language that we use and trying to be an interpreter. And as an integrator, a systems integrator, the role of the integrator is really critical in the Internet of Things. When the Internet of Things started to kind of form and make sense about 5 years ago, and we've always had telemetry and machine to machine, there was this view that it would be literally dominated by the major telcos and that they could see, the huge opportunity here. But that's actually that hasn't played out. And the reason why that hasn't played out is, whilst yes, the telcos are very important because they provide the great communications networks for us to be able to get data from sensors to applications, actually what's important is the ability to create those conversations. And you know, the Internet of Things is still not seamless. There's a value chain that's still got to be all brought together. And so that's why being an integrator is very important, because you've got to understand how to bring data, you know, from a device into, you know, a system, and to make those things talk together. So ecosystem, two parts. There's the technology side, but there's also the customer user side. And in the space that we're working very strongly in, which is smart cities and infrastructure and energy and water, being very involved in the industry associations and being inclusive of the policy makers and regulators is very, very important.
Yeah, and I think that's some people are so busy within the IoT community itself. It's easy to forget that that if you're working or providing services into an industry, they have their own ways of making their decisions. So it's a very, very important point to make. So thank you for that. Okay, so if I then ask, if we just kind of take a step back again and kind of look at this from a slightly different perspective. Again, you must have a lot of people wanting to get into IoT for the first time. Mm-hmm. And I think Mesheds have got a really nice approach to helping people get started as well, with the kind of out of the box solution, and kind of you think very much about getting people started in the easiest kind of way. So can I get you to just talk to me a little bit about kind of that approach, and not necessarily the details of the solution, but more the approach and why you feel that's needed for the kind of smart city kind of marketplace particularly?
More than happy to. So being 30 years in cities and infrastructure, and coming from the likes of an IBM, and then having to look at what was the market opportunity and where do we start. You know, we were thinking, do we start in Australia and New Zealand, or do we start elsewhere? The reason why we started in Australia and New Zealand was because Australia and New Zealand were way behind the 8 ball in terms of smart cities. I've spent many, many years in Barcelona, Singapore, Amsterdam, London, all those places that are always, put up on the pedestal as being the smartest cities. And I felt that there was a great opportunity to realise the value of smart cities and the Internet of Things in my region. But the secret sauce was making it easy and digestible to the person who's sitting in the city, who doesn't have any technical capability, and nor should they, because at the end of the day, they're just worried about improving, the service to the citizen. Then, of course, you're up against cost, because essentially cities have to do more with less. So they are always constrained by budgets. And then the other important piece was the hand-holding. The old term of, there's a bit of risk here, but if someone's actually hand-holding me along the way, and I know that I'm taking a measured risk, then that's important to me. So what we did was, when we first started, we were deploying, large deployments, and that was fine, but that relied on, obviously, the market being mature to go to market for those large deployments. So, we had this idea, what if we could actually just create a smart city starter kit and put the smart city in a box? And that's what we did. And we now have nearly 60 cities, some of which have started with the smart city starter kit, which to your viewers is really quite simple. It's a pre-configured, out-of-the-box LoRaWAN network connected with a selection of sensors, which are important to the city. So parking, bins, people counters, toilet facilities or public facilities, presence sensors, a good variety of sensors, soil moisture probes, sensor terror devices, whatever they need for their parks and gardens, putting that in a box, giving them also the ability to view that data very, very quickly, and making it affordable for them. And it's been successful because with the starter kit, the very brave, person in the city who's taken this on has very quickly been able to show his other members of his departments the value of the data. And so then that has created conversations where then the other departments, whether they be parks, whether they be amenity and hygiene or environment, or they could be, the assets, people, it's created an opportunity for them to take hold of this. And I think that's been a success. And also coupled with the Things Network, which for your viewers, if you're not familiar, the Things Network is a free or public access Internet of Things data network. It's the largest decentralized LoRaWAN network in the world. And that's also enabled us to wrap some services, around that and provide that as a service to the city market and infrastructure market.
Yeah, it's a true land and expand.
It's a land and expand, and it's important that I think I shared this at the conference last year. I had one final slide, which were lessons learned. The important role of the integrator. To be successful in the market, you have to be prepared to answer the questions around security, around the impact of these sensors going into the public realm, right? Because people will ask, if we put up a device, what's that doing? So you have to be very educated and be prepared to answer those questions and to do it genuinely. And I think that's also something that we've worked really hard in, listening to the customer, being prepared to answer those questions, and by having a solution that they can touch and feel comfortable with, it's given them a lot of courage to then take it to scale.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And it's I once had an old boss who said nobody ever gets fired for buying IBM. Mm-hmm. I always got frustrated because we had this fantastic new technology. Why aren't people adopting it? Because it's risky. So if you can de-risk it all for them and answer the most important barriers, fear, security, being able to explain it to their peers and their bosses, it's all super important. It's all psychological stuff. So yes, if we use that as a pivot, Catherine, then to think a bit more human, because we've talked a lot about the technology, the cities, and how you go there, some of your strategy. But if I ask you about the kind of more human skills that you need, a lot of what you're talking about here is the translator. Mm-hmm. So not only do you need really good technology skills, obviously, but what other kind of skills do you need in order to succeed in an IoT project? Like if you've got a customer wanting to start a project, what kind of skills do they need to have in their project?
You need to have a very strong EQ. Your emotional intelligence and your awareness of others needs to be very, very high, because when people ask me, what am I in the business of? I say, I'm in the business of change management. I'm in the business of change management because when you think about the Internet of Things coupled with artificial intelligence and machine learning and data, you're actually asking people to change what they've done for a very long period of time. Now with the Internet of Things, you're changing that behaviour because you're getting data off an asset in near real time, and that's enabling that person to behave differently. If they were the facilities manager or the asset manager, They may have to, they see the value in getting the data in real time because that helps them to understand what's happening in their building or their network or their water network or their city, and then they can respond, accordingly. And some of them also can take that as an opportunity to start to interact at a higher level, to provide higher value services. Now, the reason why you're in change management is because you're actually instrumenting behavioural shift within an organisation. So, people in the business of the Internet of Things and smart cities, it's very important that they recognise that you are dealing with people. You're not dealing with machines, because people are going to make the decisions as to whether or not that implementation of that particular solution derived value to them. And they may have to have conversations across their business. They may have to go and talk to the finance department to understand how they're going to fund it. They'll need to go and talk to possibly the customer engagement people, the customer service people, because this might change the way in which they currently do customer service. What systems are they using? How are they getting the data, in terms. So this is where you start to get different parts of the organisation. So having technology skills is important, but having people skills to be able to bring that together is very important. So change management and governance is very high on, I would say, the skills quartile for this particular industry.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And then if I ask you, then kind of take a step back and look at this again, and it's about success. So, I think that there's, Catherine, who's had, a huge array of experience here, and you're also looking at this as a person, as a founder of and kind of member of your own startup, but also kind of a leader in the ecosystem here. You're trying to do something bigger than just for your own organization. So if I ask you what success means to you, you've got a lot of different perspectives there, but how would you answer that question?
Customers, basically customers referring other customers. That to us is success. If we do a good job and we provide great service and they like what they see and it's genuine and they make recommendations, that is success. And that's actually why our land and expand model has been successful, because our customers are telling the story of the value that they've been able to get out of the Internet of Things. And I think, I could be wrong, but I heard an anecdote once, and I'm not sure, it could have been the CEO of AWS. I'm not sure who it was, but I read it, and it was along the lines that if you focus on your customers, you're going to be misguided. You need to focus. So if you focus on your competitors, that's a misguided view to actually look at success. Success is actually your customer and providing the best customer service. And that is what it's about. And I think success for me in industry and in what I've attributed to the industry and my career has been the ability to connect the dots and to put people together, and also to be really aware that you're an island, you're not the only person in this ecosystem, and you just have to be prepared that some things won't go your way, but if you are collaborative and genuine, that will get you through it. And I think that's something that's always been very important to us. I think also we're a values-based organisation. Mesheds is very focused on the environment, and we do feel that there's an opportunity for us to look at the world in a way that is much more sustainable. So I think success also is the sustainability of the business.
Nice, thank you. And because we've got time, and I think again because of your very unique perspective. So now we are kind of heading towards the end of June. We've all been living with the COVID pandemic now for a few months. I spoke to some people right at the beginning of the pandemic. All of these kind of interviews have been during that time, but I specifically wanted to speak to you about it because you've had quite a lot of success in being able to help with some of that. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about kind of what you've been seeing, what you've been hearing, and also kind of where you've been able to help and assist.
Yes, Christine. So Meshed has been helping communities and cities and governments with understanding the impact, the social, mobility and economic impacts of COVID-19 onto communities. And we are using pedestrian flow or pedestrian counting information that's been generated off the Meshed Encounter people counting solution, which we have distributed across multiple cities with over 100 locations that we've selected to do the study. And we're doing a time series analysis on what did a normal pattern look like pre-COVID, and then during COVID, and now sort of post-COVID. Although here we are today, we're seeing even a resurgence in Australia, which has had very strict social distancing and travel bans. We're seeing a bit of an uptake now in some of our communities. But what we're going to be doing is we're publishing this independent research. We're doing it in partnership with the University of Wollongong. And it's going to help cities with understanding how do they recover and where do we need to focus on targeted stimulus and programs to stimulate back the local economies. And we are talking local economies. We're talking at the neighbourhood level because pedestrian flow information can be sourced from parks, railway stations, central business districts, libraries, swimming pools, public places. And so we're trying to bring the story together. And we're very proud of that work, and we will be publishing it very shortly. But on LinkedIn, we've been publishing the Meshed COVID Pedestrian Index. And the idea for that came where, as an industry here in Australia, we thought it would be a great opportunity for different technology solution providers to think about ways in which they could help with COVID-19. Now, of course, there are some more obvious, examples where organisations that have been manufacturing, for example, medical equipment, and we're using IoT for resource management and equipment monitoring and all of that. Tracking and tracing is a really good, example of how IoT and data is helping, health authorities and governments around the world to deal with the issue. But because we are very focused around the cities and infrastructure space, we thought there was something in taking a deeper look into pedestrian counting information and seeing what insights we could get out of that.
Nice. Thank you so much for that, because I think it's there's so many different ways IoT can help. And I think, speaking to a few people, obviously doing tracking and kind of how often is a bathroom being cleaned and is the soap and hygiene stuff, still full is some of the kind of most obvious ones. What I liked about your example is it's not necessarily the most obvious one, because it's also thinking more in systems. And that's
yes.
IoT can really, that's where the real benefit of IoT can sometimes come in, where you can actually begin to look at behaviour for the first time in a way that nobody's ever had that data before. So I'm really looking forward to seeing your results when they come out.
Christine, that's a really good point. It's interesting because it's about looking at the actual economic and social impacts. And the other solution that we're also deploying is proximity sensing. So we're using IoT and LoRaWAN and the Things Network to help our customers as they return to work. So major universities, councils who are running libraries and sporting facilities, property owners and precinct owners that are having to provide obviously services to people as they come into public spaces. So this proximity sensing as well, we think also is a really good application of IoT, where you can use, combined with pedestrian counting, you can start to then understand that as places fill and these workers are interfacing to those numbers, then you can send out alerts and they can help guide basically social distancing and ensuring that people are going about their daily lives in a much safer manner.
Yeah, nice. And I think that's a really nice point to end on. So thank you so much, Catherine. Greatly appreciate it.